Et donc, on va commencer l'après-midi avec un sujet passionnant, un benchmark international sur le RegTech. On va switch in English pour cette première intervention. J'ai vraiment le grand plaisir d'inviter Maria. Please come here, Maria. She's an excellent expert, and thank you so much for participating. Yeah, you can sit. So as Amazon, you have a global view of those subjects, and thank you again for your intervention.
Thank you. Is it working? Yeah, perfect. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
I'll introduce myself. Thank you for the invitation again. My name is Maria Sani. I lead the Financial Services, Public Policy and Regulatory Affairs work at AWS, so Amazon Web Services, the cloud business of Amazon. It's a pleasure to be here, so thank you. Just to give you a little bit on my background, I worked in the financial services industry for over 20 years now. I dealt with the post-crisis regulatory reform program, so dealing with all sorts of stuff from derivatives regulation to prudential issues, benchmarks, you name it. So it's great to be here now talking about some of the global trends that we are seeing in terms of the evolution of the regulation of technology in the financial services sector. And apologies, I have to do this in English. There's nowhere I'll be able to do this in French. Perhaps given my background, I kind of started thinking when I was doing my speaking notes about the situation that we were dealing with back in 2008, 2009, when the new regulatory framework for financial services was being built. And I think there's a couple of issues there that are worth kind of considering when we look at what is happening today around the world, and particularly in Europe, obviously, given we are sitting where we are. And there's two issues there. I think one of the key issues back then was the global agreement on the regulatory framework. And as you probably remember, there was an agreement at the G20, and that kind of trickled down legislation at the jurisdictional level. And those regulatory frameworks were broadly, I would say broadly adopted across the major jurisdictions to a certain extent. So there was a consistency in the regulatory framework globally. The other point was that the focus was clearly on market risk and credit risk, and rightly justified, I would say. And those were areas where obviously financial regulators had a lot of expertise on. What we are seeing today, though, when it comes to digital finance and technology in the financial services sector, I think there's two differences with what I just was saying. First of all, there is no global agreement on what the regulatory framework for digital finance should look like. And there's also the fact that this is a new area for regulators. New area demands a new regulatory framework that has to be from scratch on technologies that are constantly evolving. And this is the case either in the operational resilience side or the crypto assets or AI. And you know, despite the efforts from the international institutions like the Basel Committee or IOSCO or the FSB, there hasn't really been a framework that has been kind of given the stamp of approval at the international level. In Europe, obviously, as you know, the regulators and the policymakers have decided to take the first step on all these areas. And we are now at the stage where the implementation of the regimes, again, being on operational resilience on DORA or crypto assets, MiCA, on AI with the AI Act, are now being implemented. And of course, we don't know how this is going to impact the market until we actually see it in practice. But one of the key issues that I think will be whether it will have any impact in terms of market fragmentation or regulatory fragmentation, and what that will look like and what would that be the impact on firms operating in Europe and globally. And this is happening at the same time where the objectives of the regulators haven't really changed from what the objectives are, which is ultimately financial stability, transparency in markets. So one key message I always try to convey when I speak to regulators is, well, how do we look at the current developments on the regulatory space and in the financial technology space, and how do we reconcile that with a regulatory and a supervisory toolbox that may not be fit for that environment in which we are operating today, that ever-changing technological environment. And I know Mr. Vorier spoke about this before, and I think we ought to think about this both from the financial entity side in terms of how we approach compliance, but also the regulators, how do you approach this with that toolbox that may require some thoughtful reconsideration. These, I think, are challenges, but I think there are also some opportunities, obviously. I think the fact that we're starting from scratch, building these frameworks, can provide some opportunities that need to be realized in order for the financial services sector here in France, in Europe, and global firms to actually succeed in this new evolving environment. And I think implementation, as I said, we are kind of moving into the implementation phase in all of these regulations and requirements here, particularly in Europe. So I think the implementation by the supervisors and by the regulators will be absolutely key to deliver on this, and I'm sure many of you are involved in those implementation efforts. As a starting point, I think having a consistent, a proportionate, and hopefully at some point globally coordinated framework will be absolutely important in order to avoid market fragmentation and regulatory fragmentation, and maybe, who knows, a race to the bottom, right? I was thinking particularly, and been very involved in the operational risk side of things and the Digital Operational Resilience Act, and I think it's very important to consider how the implementation of DORA will impact financial entities here in France, and I think a key issue will be to ensure that across the Union, supervisory expectations remain aligned with the requirements and across member states, because any sort of gold plating, and you know what I mean by that, could actually disadvantage firms in France. That's one aspect, and I'm not sure you've seen, but the ECB has recently published a consultation on their supervisory expectations, and I see there, our view is that there are some of those requirements there that maybe go beyond what is required in DORA, and that would have that will trickle down to national competent authorities, to other national competent authorities. So the possibility of fragmentation is really real when it comes to supervision, and that really could have a very detrimental impact on firms and overall on the resilience of the European financial system. So in addition to that, I think the good thing about DORA, and I think this aligns with what has been discussed at the international level more recently at the VCBS, DORA does not recognize any type of localization requirements as a means to achieve operational resilience, and this ability for financial firms to choose their preferred provider, be it because they consider it's the best provider they could get. It's absolutely important for that, for them to be able to innovate and by as a result to be competitive in a global market. So these two issues in terms of addressing supervisory expectations and delivering on convergence and getting the fundamentals right would be absolutely critical in order to facilitate the speed up of adoption of technology here in France and across Europe. And in terms of what we're seeing in other jurisdictions, because Europe has moved very fast, I think again, going back to the point around implementation will be important in order not to put European and French companies at a disadvantage at a time where competitiveness is the word in town now in terms of the European debate. As mentioned by, obviously, Mario Draghi in his report, which is due to be released next week. So there's a real urgency for innovation, according to him, in his report. And the financial services sector is, of course, part of those sectors where he identifies this need for innovation. Second point, and I said this again, but ensuring that the regulation and the supervisory practice are adapted to the new realities. It's again key for financial stability, as we said. Any sort of fragmentation at the global level would mean that what is effectively a global market and operational resilience knows no borders, and cyber security knows no borders, so having a globally consistent approach would contribute to the objective of financial stability. And this is not just an effort from the financial entities. It's not an effort that is only on the hands of the regulators. We truly believe that it should be a collective effort. Regulators, the financial ecosystem, and technology providers like AWS need to come together to promote solutions that are fit for the digital age, and obviously dialogues like this, where we all gather together and can exchange views, it's absolutely important, and the work that finance innovation is doing is playing an important role as well. This private-public partnership has proven successful in other countries, and I can think of the UK, where the Bank of England, for example, has set up a dialogue in the context of UK finance and CMORG, where the private and the public sector come together to discuss issues. Initiatives like that are very, very encouraging, and I would hope to see those replicated here as well. Am I on time? Yeah? Okay. I have lots to say, so I'll try to keep it high level, but you got my contact details. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'll be around if you want to contact me for any questions. Thank you.